If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high-quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hey, warmer from Evo! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined by one of our good friends, Blake Lovell. He does great work over at Southeastern 16, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. We're going to be chatting with him about what we've seen in the SEC over the last few weeks, the interesting mixes and matches that we've seen with regards to the Texas A&M roster, as well as they hired on Bucky McMillan, and right now they are making some very interesting moves out there in the transfer portal. What can we expect out of them? Can we expect Tennessee to try to get on the board with a big-time ad in the transfer portal as well? We're going to be taking a look at that and then so much more. And in the final segment, I'm going to give you guys a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. And right now with the podcast, it's been mostly 2 segments, so would like to be able to add a 3rd segment with your questions. So if there is something that you want to hear on this podcast, if there is a question, comment, segment idea that you want me to address, you've got one of 2 ways we fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM. Name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Everything today is brought to you by EdgeBoost over at edgeboost.bet. Utilize the promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That'll get you a dollar for dollar match on your first $25 deposit, and it's an account that allows bettors to be able to utilize their funds in any way that they want at any time, 24/7, 365 on leap years, 366 days of the year, and you earn cash back rewards as you utilize EdgeBoost. Now let's talk with our good friend Blake Lovell of Southeastern 16. He does such amazing work covering this great game of college basketball. Also does some great work over at Clutch Points Sports as well, so he is a little bit all over the place. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X at the Blake Lovell. Last name is spelled Lovell. And Blake, it is great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks as always for having me, Greg.
Blake, it is such an interesting offseason because, as you know, when you got north of 2,400 guys in the transfer portal, there's going to be a lot of movement. But out of all the teams in the SEC right now, I think the hardest one for me to wrap my finger around and the hardest one for me to really decipher is Texas A&M, because we both know Bucky McMillan from his days over at Stanford, the way that they played Bucky ball and everything like that. And just what do you see right now from this Texas A&M roster? Because with the guys that he brought in, I don't know if he's necessarily going to be able to stick it out with regards to that high pressure style, because it does feel like he's bringing in a lot of big men, and it does feel like his style might be undergoing some tweaks this upcoming season.
Yeah, and I think that was always going to be one of the interesting things, was just to see, how does the style look compared to what we were used to seeing at Stanford. And we knew, there would have to be some obvious adjustments, I think, just based off of that. And like you said, I think when you kind of see the roster he's put together, you can certainly see some of that so far, where you mentioned, they got a lot of size on the roster. You got your entire front court basically 6'3", 6'11" guys, I guess, right now as it stands. And so, yeah, I think you're certainly looking at it and seeing what kind of those tweaks that are going to be made. You kind of, again, look at the backcourt and see how that's made up a little bit. You do have someone in Lane who comes in who can obviously shoot the ball really well, and you just kind of see how those things, really start to blend into the way that we know he wants to play. Whether he can play it this year or not remains to be seen. But I think when you just look at, what they can do just from, the standpoint of playing the Bucky ball, that's the style. Can they do it with this first team? I think you'll see some of those things implemented, but usually it feels like we see some of these teams that have new head coaches that have kind of a defined style. They can't do it right away with that first roster, but you start to see some of those things to where they can build off of it after that.
Yep, I'm right there with you, and I do think that is going to be so fascinating to gauge this season. What does Texas A&M do? Because I'm not sure about you, but I think that they're the biggest question mark in the league. Certainly with Texas, they're a little bit of one as well, but I do think the fact that they actually have a few pieces coming back for that backcourt, Jordan Pope and company, I think that that's really big for them. And I do think that Sean Miller has put together a really nice offseason over there at Texas, because typically when you have a coaching change like Texas does, it typically leads to pretty much everyone jumping ship, and that did not happen with the Longhorns.
No, I think with Texas, to me, they're probably the team that, outside of just that group of team, that we would probably, place near the top, whether that, in some order are teams like Florida and Arkansas, Kentucky, Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee, teams like that. I mean, to me, the most intriguing team outside of that group of six is Texas. And I think they're the one that, like you said, I mean, bringing back Weaver, bringing back Pope, Tremont Mark's back again. I mean, he has just played a lot of minutes now in the SEC, whether it was at Arkansas, now, at Texas for a couple of years, of course, was at Houston before that. And then you look at the way the front court is really built out. Remember, that was kind of the biggest question we had for Texas last year, was to see how the front court play was going to really develop. I knew they had a star in Trey Johnson, but that was one of the areas. And now when you look at kind of what they have coming in, with Swain and Vokititis and obviously even Traore, we talked about before, coming over from Long Beach State. When he was good, he was really good. And so I think those are the kind of things that, as you look at this first roster for Sean Miller, seems like, they've still got a couple spots available that they're probably going to want to fill here. But overall, I mean, I think they're right there in terms of that top tier in the SEC, in terms of the top half of the league. I'd be surprised if they're, in my mind, anywhere maybe lower than seventh or eighth heading into the season.
Yep, I'm right there with you, and I think that they've done a very good job. Blake Lovell does such great work over at Southeastern 16 is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and it is a very intriguing offseason because we've seen a lot of teams make a bunch of really good moves, but the one team I'm sort of waiting on right now, and I want to get your thoughts here, it is Tennessee, because with Tennessee, the last two off seasons, they've went out and they've gotten a go-to scorer that I felt like they horribly needed. Dalton Connect, obviously, 2 seasons ago, we saw that worked out. Chaz Lanier this past season, we saw that worked out as well. And I mean, the ads that they've had have been fine. Amari Abraham has some SEC experience. You bring in Jacoby Gillespie, who I think is rock solid over at Maryland, but I don't view him as like a Dalton Connect sort of guy or anything like that. And then Jalen Carey from Vanderbilt. I want to get your thoughts on Tennessee, because with Tennessee, they do have a lot of the ancillary pieces returning, but as we know, Zakai Ziegler, he's moving on. I think that Gillespie could be able to fill that Zakai Ziegler role, but I'm just still wondering for Tennessee, are they going to be able to find that go-to scorer? Because it's starting to get late in the process, and I would have to think that if they're going to be able to find one of those go-to scorers, they might need to wait until after the NBA draft decisions are all settled.
Yeah, and I think with Tennessee, what's interesting is, like you said, I mean, they've added some nice pieces that are going to fit really well together, I think, but you don't have a Chaz Lanier on the roster. Again, Gillespie's going to be great. He's probably not Zakai Ziegler in terms of the things that he brought to the table. I mean, that'd be an unfair comparison probably for most players out there, but still, I mean, he's going to be relied upon as one of the best players on this team. But I think what could be interesting for Tennessee, this one's kind of still with Tennessee fans, they're still trying to get an answer on this, because he's trying to get an answer, and that is Jordan Gainey, talking about, will it kind of have that extra year of eligibility? If he does, then, I mean, certainly you look at that as a possibility, which, again, we know, Greg, with all the technical things and everything, I assume that is still in play now based on some recent information that I've seen. And so
trying to figure out eligibility in the NCAA right now is like trying to lick your finger, throw it up in the air, and trying to determine what the weather is going to be for the next day. It's insane.
It is. And it's just, again, like, you got to go through this whole House versus the NCAA thing and try to figure out, okay, is he going to have an option? And so, if you are a Tennessee fan, you're just saying, okay, that's best case scenario. Could that happen? But otherwise, like you said, I mean, it's one where they have a lot of players on the roster. It looks a bit different, obviously, having a stud freshman like Nate Ament there. He's expected to play a big role right away, but it's going to be kind of interesting to see if they were to add one more piece, maybe, especially to that backcourt or wing, just to kind of see maybe how that fills out a bit from a scoring standpoint for the Vols.
Yeah, that's certainly going to be something to watch, to say the least, not just Jordan Gainey, but you've got a lot of guys out there fishing for eligibility right now, and it is a wild, wild landscape out there in the NCAA, to say the least. So just how do you take a look at that? Because there are a lot of guys that enter in the transfer portal with no eligibility remaining whatsoever, but I know that there were a few agents that just came out and said, hey, you got nothing to lose by entering in the transfer portal, so let's see if we can go the Seth Towns route and try to get your number 15 of eligibility and things like that. Chad Baker-Mazar, who I thought he was sanctioned last year, is back for another year of college basketball as well, and I think that that's an interesting wrinkle, because if these guys do get deemed eligible, that's a whole new crop of guys, and a good crop of guys that becomes available for a lot of these power conference schools, which have the pockets to be able to pay these guys.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's the worst that can happen for these players. They just get said, all right, well, you don't have it.
Or you're Ian Chufflin and you play football.
Right. Like, I mean, it's like, you go do something else. Like, that is where it's at right now. Like you said, I mean, there's no problem for these players to sit here and just take a shot and see what happens. And I think that's what a lot of teams are thinking too, because there are a lot of guys, as we said a minute ago, going to go through this NBA draft process. And, usually you feel like you have a good idea of what's going to happen with some of those guys, but I feel like these days, not as much, just because you are, in the NIL era where players could get simply more options financially to come back to school rather than going the professional route. And so it makes it a little bit tougher to figure out exactly what you're going to see with some of these guys. And so, yeah, it's kind of impossible to figure out. And, you get guys that go into, like you said, the portal that maybe are trying to wait to see if they're going to have that extra year. You get guys go in that you think are headed to the NBA draft, and yet you hear a lot of hearsay about what they're going to do. Like, Boogie Flan, obviously someone in Arkansas, there's been rumors out there about Florida. I don't know what I believe with that. Or that's just the way it works, though, in this era where it's like, hey, everybody's trying to kind of play that advantage one way or the other and figure out what the best scenario is for them. And, with agents doing the work behind the scenes too, Greg, it's just like, how do you sort through some of this information and know exactly what you're going to get? So it makes it a lot tougher to really evaluate these teams. And, I can remember back probably, however many years ago, you and I were probably the kind of people who are sitting here right now in May saying, all right, like now we get to look ahead and do our early rankings for next season because we know exactly what these teams are going to look like. How in the world could I do that right now based on still just feels like a lot of movement out there?
Gosh, I would laugh so hard at someone's way too early top 25 because that needs to be updated not just daily, but at this point hourly with the amount of movement that we have been seeing. So I'm right there with you as Blake Lovell does such great work over at Southeastern 16 is joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, and that is a big giant ball of wax to be taking a look at, but also a big giant ball of wax to be taking a look at is some of these top teams out there as well, because what I think has been really a hallmark of this offseason to me, and I want to get your thoughts here, is that the Big Ten is finally getting with the program, because I feel like they're starting to copy, for lack of a better term, the SEC model. They brought in some good coaches here in the offseason, and they've really adapted to the transfer portal. The SEC, I felt like, was very much early on this. I feel like Eric Musselman led the way for so many of these schools, and now everyone has been able to get in line, and they've been able to do a great job of utilizing their collectives and their funds to be able to get these guys. But I feel like the Big Ten is starting to follow suit, and I want to get your thoughts here because I do still think that the SEC is most likely going to be the most dominant conference in all of college basketball this upcoming season. But I do take a look at the Big Ten, and I think that they're doing a good job of narrowing the gap with the moves that they made this offseason.
Yeah, I agree. And everybody knows, like, I'm the SEC guy, but like I'm a little more pessimistic on the SEC heading into next season. And it's not because I don't think there are a lot of very talented rosters. You can look at the way too early bracketologies and all that. And sure, the SEC for a lot of people are probably still leading the way. But I think just overall, they're going to be those number of top level teams the same way there was last year? Or maybe the better question is, they're going to be the depth that there was last year. I think it remains to be seen. Meanwhile, like you said, you look at teams in the Big Ten, whether, teams we've already talked about this offseason of Michigan, seeing what they did, obviously what you're getting now at Maryland with Buzz Williams and some of the talent he's been able to bring in there. Of course, Indiana kind of, revamping the roster now as well with a new coach. And then, look at USC. I mean, they've been kind of the biggest winner as of late, given what Eric Musselman has done. Just when we thought Rodney Rice was headed to either Villanova or Tennessee, he goes to USC. Chad Baker-Mazara enters the portal, surprisingly. What happens? He winds up with a must bus out there in Southern California. And so I just think, yeah, like you said, this was always going to be a thing where it wasn't just going to be, hey, everybody's going to sit back and watch the SEC do this, and then everyone's just going to, just sit there and just keep letting it happen. No, everyone's going to react and try to be proactive in terms of figuring out, okay, what do we have to do to be the next conference that goes out there and puts 14 teams in? And we've already seen that this offseason, like you said, whether it's some of these teams in the Big Ten. You look at some of the teams in the ACC, I think especially, obviously Louisville has significantly upgraded in some areas to be able to bring in some of the guys that they're going to bring in. I mean, look at what Miami's done now under, a new coach. I mean, NC State goes without saying what Will Wade has done in terms of bringing guys in. Of course, just landed PJ Haggerty. So it's just all those different things I think you look at and kind of know that not everyone's just going to sit back and keep letting the SEC kind of control things. And I think you're seeing that more conferences, more teams are certainly committed to trying to match what the SEC can do.
Yep, they certainly are, and we've been seeing a lot of teams be able to step up, have themselves some very nice off seasons. Like I mean, I take a look at a school, for example, in High Point, the fact that they've been able to bring in so much talent this offseason, that's been something that's really been speaking to me. And who are a few schools that you take a look at right now, and you feel like their off seasons have went a little bit under the radar. It could be out there in the SEC, it could be out there just nationally, mid-major, high major. It's Steelers' choice on this one. Or just a few schools that you think are really doing it right this offseason, that they deserve a little bit more love than what they've received for their moves.
We always know there's a pretty big pool you can pull from when it comes to some of those. But, it's like I look at different teams and I'm just thinking, okay, the one specifically where you do have some of these coaching changes and knowing, you and I have talked about this before, where it's like you're trying to put together a completely new roster in some of these situations, right? And if it's looking at someone like Ben McCollum at Iowa, and we've already talked about some of the other, coaches that have stepped into different spots. We mentioned Indiana, NC State, places like that. But I think those are the ones, and I guess it is kind of hard maybe just to narrow it down to a couple. But to me, those are the ones that I always find the most curious, because we said it at the start with Texas A&M, right? I mean, we're looking up 2 weeks ago and we're thinking, man, A&M might be the worst team in the SEC next year. And then I'm looking up now and I'm thinking, wow, like he's done a pretty good job building the roster up to where now I'm like, okay, that's probably an NCAA tournament team. They may not compete for an SEC championship, but maybe it is a team that, like we said, is sort of competing for one of those spots. And so I think those are the teams that I just kind of find the most intriguing here as we go, kind of into this next evolution of seeing where some of these players land based on some of these NCAA or NBA draft decisions. And all that. And so I think to me, it's kind of just looking at coaches in new spots and being able to see how they continue to fill out the rosters, because it's not always just about those couple guys you're getting that are going to lead the way. It's really looking at how can I build on the depth that I'm going to have in some of these spots. And so to me, those are kind of the interesting ones. I think West Virginia is kind of a fascinating one too. When you look at what Ross Hodges put together there, of course, with Trace and Eagles staff, especially, of course, he was someone who started in South Carolina and now seemingly headed there. So yeah, I think it's just kind of a lot of those kind of fascinating situations, especially with some of these guys that, again, are taking over jobs and feel like they kind of are behind the 8 ball a bit when it comes to building their roster a little bit later in the process than others.
Yep, it certainly has been interesting with that front, and being able to get Eagle staff. I thought that was a massive add as well. Just sort of shows where we're at in this day and age of the NIL collectives and in terms of everything that's happening in college basketball, where he goes from the SEC on over to West Virginia without ever playing a game in the SEC as well. But a man that is always a gamer, a man that is doing a great job all 12 months of the year. Taking a look at this great game that we all know and love. That'd be you, Blake. Let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, always appreciate it, Greg. You can check out everything SEC-wise we do over at Southeastern 16 on YouTube. Yeah, find us there. Lots of SEC basketball stuff here in the offseason, looking at the rosters and transfers and all that good stuff, and everything else college basketball. Find me on Twitter at @Blake Lovell.
And Blake does an amazing job looking at this awesome game. So big thanks to Blake for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family podcast. And coming up next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours.
If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN family podcast. Always great to be joined by Blake Lovell. He does such great work over at Southeastern 16. Taking a look at this great game of college basketball that we all know and love every single time he joins me and lends such great insights, and did so once again today. So a big thanks to Mr. Blake for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. You saw Rob Whaley Jr. decide that he is going to be going to Kent State, just completely had his last season marred due to injury. He only played in 2 games over at UNLV 2 seasons ago. He was an okay player, 7.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game. This is a little bit of a roll of the dice sort of a transfer, trying to see if he could catch lightning in a bottle, if he's able to get back to his old form. And I do think that this is one that could be pretty fruitful for them. He's someone that is able to give you something down low, not going to be really popping in and locking in from 3-point range, but with Kent State losing the likes of Soleron, Hornbeak and company from a season ago. They needed someone down low, so being able to take this a little bit of a risk at this point in the transfer portal, I think that this is one that could be able to pay off for them, so I do like this move for them. And then we did see this one as we've got ourselves Jaden Stone heading on over to Missouri, who he 2 seasons ago over at Detroit was a dominant scorer, 21 points per contest, steal and a half per game. He was not able to get out there on the floor for West Virginia last season due to injury. Never has been really a super accurate 3-point shooter, so he's a little bit of a, shall we say, scoring dynamo. Doesn't necessarily play the world's greatest amount of defense, so he'll fit in perfectly with Missouri. So this is very much a textbook fit right there. We shall see what Missouri is going to be able to do moving forward after it was a really good first year under Dennis Gates. It was an awful second year under Dennis Gates. Then they get back to the NCAA tournament last year, so it's been up, down, all around for them. But I really like the overall talent that they're bringing in. Javon Porter is a guy from Loyola Marymount that I think fits his system really well. Sebastian Mack, the Mack truck is coming in from UCLA, so I do like that. Sean Phillips Jr. should be able to give them a little bit more rough and tumble down low, which I do feel like is very much needed. And the fact that he comes from Arizona State, he's able to play a little bit more of an up and down style as well. So I do like that pickup for them. I do like this one as well. Denver England. He was over at Rice this last season. 8.5 points, 2 boards per contest. A guy that shot about 38% from 3-point range. He's heading on over to Iona, and it took Iona a little bit of time to be able to get things going in terms of transfer portal, but all of a sudden they're picking up some nice pieces. They've been really on a run over the last, we're going to call it, week and a half or so. It really started with Chase Comer coming over from Wofford. He was a rock-solid 3-point shooter over there, and then you've got a few upside guys like a CJ Anthony, who didn't play a lot over at Cincinnati, but he was highly touted coming out of high school. You've got Kashawn Williams, who he's an upside guy that comes in from Colorado State. That's a guy that's able to handle the ball for you. Matt Reed is a relatively solid rebounder who comes in from Tulsa, and now you're bringing England. Again, not a guy that's really going to be shooting it from 3-point range too much, but I like what Iona has going on. They bring in a coach that has some NBA experience as well, so this has been a relatively good offseason considering the circumstances. Still feel like Tobin Anderson got a very, very raw deal, to say the least, and I think that he'd be able to build this as well, but Iona looks to be getting back online. I do like that. Jay Alvarez, he was over at Rider this last season. He was averaging about 10 points and assists per contest. His best season was over at Houston Christian. A few seasons ago, he's averaging 15.5 points per contest, was a rock-solid 3-point shooter, but he's decided that he's going to Portland, and for Portland, honestly, the pieces have not been bad here in the portal. The question is, what are they going to be able to do with these pieces? Because for Shante Leggins, season number 1 was really good for him, and then ever since then, it just went straight down the tubes. They've also brought in Riley Parker from St. Francis of Pennsylvania. They've got a few guys that are going to be holdovers from a season ago. They need to add more guys because right now they brought in a pair of guys in the backcourt. Right now, all their forwards and their centers from a season ago are currently out of the fold, so right now Portland is left with guards and really not a lot else, but that said, I do like some of the guards that they've been able to pick up, so we shall see what is going to be happening there. TJ Beal, he was over at Southeast Missouri State. He has decided that he is going to be going to Maine, and for Maine, I really like what Chris Markwood has done with his program. Like, they were struggling for a really, really long time. He's really been able to develop an identity of being able to generate turnovers. Now, they have to turn over a little bit of a new leaf there, but Ryan Mabry, who's coming out over from Quinnipiac, actually be able to help out with that. Yanis Bamba, who was over at Wichita State, he's coming in along with this as well, and this is a guy in Beal who, he was over at Southeast Missouri State, averaging about 3.5 to 4 points per contest, part of a defense that did a nice job of being able to generate turnovers as well. They really cut you off from 3-point range. Not necessarily going to be some sort of an offensive dynamo, but at 6'7", he's able to guard multiple positions. This is once again going to be a Maine team that's probably going to be hanging their head on defense, and this is another step in that direction. You've got Fresno State's Brian Amunke, who was over in the backcourt for the Bulldogs. He averaged 7.5 points per contest last year. One of the few guys not involved in that gambling scandal, shot 40.5% from 3-point range. He's decided that he's going to Wichita State. Now, if this guy is seeing a bunch of minutes for Wichita State, something has went horribly wrong for Wichita State. But that said, Wichita State, under this Paul Mills style, in their 2 years, they haven't been able to shoot threes. And the Paul Mills style does not work well if you don't shoot it well from 3-point range. So being able to bring in this level of a transfer, I think is very good for them. And they've already got Keenan Giles, who comes out over from UNC Greensboro. That was a good addition. Jared Valencia 2 years ago shot 40% from 3-point range at Monmouth. Completely fell off the map last season, but that's a nice upside get. And now they've been able to fortify things a little bit down low, and they've needed to because they are going to be missing someone like a Quincy Ballard from a season ago, Will Berg, the Berg coming on over from Purdue, and Emmanuel Okafor from Seton Hall. I think that those are some rock solid adds along Karan Boyd, who showed some versatility at ETSU. I like what they've done, but Paul Mills, again, he was so good at Oral Roberts, first few years here at Wichita State, I've got my question marks, so we're going to need to see it to believe it there. Here's a good ad for South Dakota, a South Dakota team that they did not play a hair of defense last season, but they were pretty solid on offense. Jordan Crawford, he was over at Eastern Kentucky last season, about 7.5 points, did average 1.4 steals per contest, so might be able to give you a little bit of something there, because, well, for South Dakota, any sort of defense whatsoever would be an upgrade for them, but he has decided that he is going to be becoming a old Coyote, and I do think that this is going to be a good ad for them, as South Dakota, contrary to popular belief, not like number one in the country in terms of their three-point shooting percentage or anything like that. A pretty rock-solid team, but Crawford should be able to add a little bit of something there. Shot about 33% from three-point range. Began his career over at the College of Charleston as well, so I do like this ad for them. He's a guy that I think is going to be able to flourish as the season goes along. When he was in conference play, he was draining more around about 32.5% of his threes, but a very good defender, a guy that's able to give you some nice scoring, especially stepping down a level to the Summit League. I think that he's going to be able to go out there and is going to be able to make a very nice instant impact. Ice Emery, he has decided that he's going from Western Carolina. He's going to Cleveland State. He was able to give the team last season 9 points, 2 assists, a steal per contest. One of the lone guys that shot above like 27% from three-point range for Western Carolina as well. Cleveland State has underwent quite a bit of a change as they lose a lot of their players via the transfer portal with everything that's happened in the coaching searches this offseason, and to go through one of those, so that was a little bit less than savory, but I think that Emery's going to be able to step in right away, have some success in the Rising League. He was very much held down by the fact that Western Carolina was one of the most awful backcourts in all of college basketball, so he was unable to showcase himself. Now for Cleveland State, going to be a lot of moving parts for a team that was very good defensively last season as well. And they do have a lot of the, shall we say, same attributes of what we saw from this Cleveland State team a season ago. They're going to be looking to try to run that back, and they haven't picked up a whole bunch of guys. They pick up Foster Wonders from UW Green Bay. Over at UW Green Bay, who knows what you're able to get out of them. And then Kamari Jones, who also was over at Western Carolina, is going to be coming on over with them. So you've got a little bit of chemistry there. So going to be interesting to see what you get on that front. So Cleveland State probably going to take a bit of a setback from a season ago, but I do like what they're building there. You've got Travis Gray, who was over at Florida International last season, averaging about 4.5 points, 2.5 rebounds per game. Not a guy that's going to light you up from three. He's decided that he's going to go to Wagner. Now, Florida International always has been really good at generating turnovers, has been a little bit rough in terms of their three-point shooting defense, and Wagner, as we know, this is a team that they play all defense and absolutely no offense. You're picking up a guy that really doesn't shoot it well from three-point range. He should be able to give this team a little bit more with regards to his interior offense, and this is a Wagner team that, to call it what it is, they just need to get a few transfers up on the board, as it's been a little bit slow going for them here in the offseason, as this is their first real major transfer portal haul, other than guys that were at like the NAIA and the non-Division I ranks. But that said, I do think that this is going to be a relatively solid pickup for them and very much fits the mold of what you're looking for out of old Wagner. Jamal West, he was over at Nichols this last season, 12.5 points, 6.5 boards, a block and a half per contest. Very versatile player. He's going on over to UTEP. He should be able to help out a UTEP team that over the last few seasons under Coach Golden and that system, it has been one of the lesser teams in terms of rebounding, to say the least, and Nichols is out there in the Southland Conference, so he is very familiar with this area of the country as well, and I do like this pickup for a UTEP team that I think that they're realizing that the style of generating turnovers is good, but they need a little bit more size to go along with it, and they've been able to address that here in the offseason. The fact that they bring in Kasim Watson, I think very much fits the system, is solid, and then Tyrese Watson, he was over at Louisiana Monroe. He should be able to give that team a little bit of something at the point, so I do like these pickups for UTEP. They're going to be missing a lot of their guys from a season ago, so they're going to need some of these reserves that weren't seeing a lot of minutes last season to be able to step up, but I do like what they're able to bring to the table. And then you saw Jazz Gardner. He's looking to get jazzy over at St. Mary's as he's coming on over from Pacific last season. 4.5 points, right around about 4 rebounds per game. Actually began his career in Nevada. This is an upside gift for St. Mary's. St. Mary's is going to be missing some of their guys from a season ago that were so rock solid down low, and for St. Mary's, this is always a team that's built around rebounding. Last 2 seasons have been a top 15 team with regards to rebound percentage. St. Mary's not necessarily a team that's going to go out there and get you a lot of guys via the transfer portal, and this is one of the first, if not their first, overall ad from the Division I ranks that they're going to be bringing in. So we will see if there's a little bit more on the way, but I would expect Jazz Gardner to be nothing other than a reserve. It just has not proven himself worthy of a lot of minutes at the Division I level as of yet, but we have seen the St. Mary's team do a nice job of being able to turn rags into riches, and we'll see if they do so here. You've got Bradley Housley, who last season was over at Utah State. He was only able to see action in 3 games after 2 seasons ago for another Utah school, Southern Utah. He was able to spy that team with about 10.5 points per contest. He threw in their 3.5 assists, 2.5 per contest. Not necessarily great 3-point shooter, but he's decided that he's going to go to Utah Valley. This just feels like a good Utah Valley get right here. Not a guy that's going to really bomb it from 3-point or anything like that, but he does a nice job be able to dole out the ball. His defense, I think, is very underrated. He's got some size at 6'4", and yet is able to have some handle. So I think that his versatility is going to be very good with that defense. I like this pickup as well. Chris Walker was over at Binghamton last season, right around about 11.5 points, a little bit over 2 steals per contest, shot 43.5% from deep. From 3-point range, he goes on over to UIC, and for UIC, this team really turned over a new leaf towards the second half of the season with regards to their defense, because their defense at the first part of the season was absolutely awful, but I love the pickups that they've had here. NT Belgian, he was the number 3 guy over at Little Rock at 6'8". He's got some good versatility. Abdul Mamoa, he's a guy that's able to really get physical down low. He, for Central Connecticut, was able to give you a block and a half per contest, but Kyle Lowry was one of the top rebounders for a Towson team, as one of the best offensive teams in all of college basketball. Elijah Crawford was a part of that just amazing BYU backcourt last season. Josiah Hammonds over at Sam Houston State, he was able to give you like 10 points per contest. I love this move for UIC. I always felt like Rob Hassan was a little bit, shall we say, underrated and underappreciated over at UAB. Put together a nice start to his UIC coaching career. He's done a nice job here in the portal as well. Now he has that 3-point shooter that he really needed to be able to complete this roster. You've got Reese Potter, who was over at Miami of Ohio. He has decided that he's going to Kentucky, and if this guy sees massive minutes for Kentucky, something is went horribly wrong. He is 7'1", but for Miami of Ohio last year, 6.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game. Now, he did actually shoot 36.5% from 3-point range, so he does have a little bit of versatility in his bag. This is something where if Potter is going to be seeing massive minutes, it's probably going to be coming 2 to 3 years down the line. This is probably nothing more than a project for Kentucky, because again, if Kentucky is giving this guy massive minutes, then what has happened with everyone else that they're bringing in via the transfer portal? This is a team that has very, very deep pockets. They are going to be returning a few guys from a season ago, but with this Kentucky team, they very much had to hit the ground running last season, and they were able to do so under Mr. Park Pope. I will give a lot of credit where it is due, but that said, with regards to the haul that Kentucky has had this offseason, bringing in someone like Denzel Aberdeen, bringing in Cam Williams, Jaden Quantons, Mohamed Diabate. Like, if this guy is seeing the floor, then something has went horribly, horribly wrong. So we shall see what happens on that front. Jameel Morrissey was over at Fairleigh Dickinson last year, and he was fairly solid. About 5 points per contest, threw in there a little bit over a steal per game. He's heading on over to Alcorn State. Alcorn State just has not done a great job of being able to bring in transfers in general. This is a very much step in the right direction, in my opinion, for them. Now, I've noticed with Alcorn State, whenever they do bring in transfers, it takes them a little bit of time to be able to get with the program. They're also bringing in Travis Roberts, who he was over at Marist this past season. He didn't necessarily see the floor too much for them. Zaxby Sutherland saw some pretty significant minutes over at Chicago State, but was not necessarily a great shooter over at Chicago State. So being able to bring in a guy like a Morris that was at a very much 3-point happy team with Fairleigh Dickinson, I think that that's going to be able to help them out as well. And then this should be of help as well. Karan McPherson, he was over at Northern Illinois this last season, 12 points per contest, 5 boards, a steal per contest. He's decided that he is going to be moving on over to UAB, and for UAB, I don't think that they're going to be giving him a mondo amount of minutes or anything like that, but I do think that he could be a guy that comes in off the bench, is able to give someone a blow, as UAB always does play a relatively up-tempo brand of basketball. This is a team that is very much offense first, and then defense is going to be very, very optional. And for UAB, it's not like they brought in a ton of guys thus far, but Kyron Lindsey, who was over at Murray State this last season, was actually the top rebounder over at Georgia a few seasons ago before he decided to just bow out of the program. That was a good ad. Jacob Meyer was a guy that was able to average about 10 points per contest at DePaul last season. Chance Westery is an upside guy that comes in from Syracuse. I think that all these pieces mesh relatively well. Again, I do have some question marks with regards to these pieces, but they all mix and match very well. And McPherson last year did shoot about 39% from 3-point. So a little bit of the 3-point shooting I felt like this team was lacking. Well, now they're able to make up for it, and they're able to get it on the board, and we're getting on the board a podcast every single day for you. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Go Soups, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, there's the name and does not matter. So, as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. The other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And big thanks once again to our good friend in Blake Lovell of Southeastern 16 for joining me in live segment. I'm coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
For the ones who get it done, the most important part is the one you need now. And the best partner is the one who can deliver. That's why millions of maintenance and repair pros trust Grainger, Because we have professional-grade supplies for every industry, even hard-to-find products. And we have same-day pickup and next-day delivery on most orders. But most importantly, we have an unwavering commitment to help keep you up and running. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.